All right, so here's the deal. Since we're going to have a lot more kids, I usually preach out of this kind of old, tattered Bible that I love. But this morning, I decided since we're going to have a bunch of kids, I'm going to preach out of this Bible, which is a little bit shinier, called the Jesus Storybook Bible. And if you're like, I don't know, like under 5 foot and you don't have one of these and you want one of these, I've got some in the back. And if you're, I don't know, over 5 foot and you don't have one of these, we can talk as well. That'll be great. So, yeah, the prices are pretty good. Oh, nice. The price is different. Yeah, that's true. That's true. $10 in the offering plate if you're over 5 foot. Yeah. So anyway, glad to have you guys out as we celebrate Christmas together. So let me address the kids really quick. And kids, if you can't see me, you can put your feet on the chair. You can whatever you need to do. Yeah, there you go. There you go. That's working for you. So kids, have you ever kind of wondered what you're getting for Christmas? Like you put your list out there, you've told them what you want, but you're not exactly sure. Some of the millennials, you're with me, even some of us who are on the wrong side of 40, maybe we've wondered what we're getting for Christmas. So what do? You go and you ask your parents, and how helpful is that when you ask their parents? Are they helpful at all? Yeah, a few of you have some parents that are cooperative, mostly not. You ask them and they don't tell you anything, so you start asking questions. And you're hoping that you guess right and like they just give something away. They show it in their face a little bit. Like you said, is it a new bike? And they like get kind of nervous, whatever. But you're working around. So you're in this mode where you're trying to figure out what you're getting, and eventually the presents come out from under the tree. And so you pick them up and you're like, okay, it feels about the right amount of weight. This could be good. And then you squeeze, I think this is a sweater. And nothing against sweaters. Aside from the fact that you've seen me preach and I sweat too much already and don't really need that. But yeah, when I get a sweater, kids, here's a pro tip for Christmas morning. When Grandma gives you a sweater, what do you say? Thank you, and smile as best you can. Same thing with socks, same thing with underwear, as embarrassing as that is. You do it, this one, it's another sweater. Let's see. This is promising. You guys hear that? Oh, and by the way, shaking, some families approve shaking, some don't. So ask your parents before you shake. My parents, it kind of depended on the present. They didn't necessarily want to give it away, but I'm old now, so I can shake. What do you think, guys? What? No. I think she's right. I think it's a Lego. I wonder which Lego. Do you think like a creator set, or maybe? I don't think it's the right shape, but the Lego that I'd really want would be the Millennium Falcon, right? Like that'd be. It's the wrong shape, but this is good. We're not going to toss this one. We're going to gently set this right there. It's going to be ready for Christmas Day. So, trying to figure out what you're getting for Christmas. It's kind of like a puzzle, right? It's you've got a certain amount of clues. You know how heavy it is, how soft it is. If you're allowed to shake it, you can maybe hear it a little bit. It's a puzzle. There's clues to solve. It's kind of a mystery. Trying to figure out how the different clues fit together. And that's exactly how the first Christmas was. They had tons of clues. They had 4,000 years of clues where God had been writing clues down in the Bible of what the first Christmas would bring, but they really didn't know how those clues fit together. So this morning we're going to explore the clues. And since we got a lot of kids here, and since we have some millennials and some over 40s and some whatnot with short attention spans, we're going to break up the sermon into two halves, So if you guys can dial in for like 10 minutes here, you're going to be good, and then we're going to give you a little bit of a break and you can sing, and some of you are really relieved. So here's the deal. I just want to look at some of the clues that they had on the very first Christmas and see how this story fits together. Again, we're going to use the Jesus Storybook Bible. I can get you one of those if you don't have one. First clues in the story. We're going to go all the way back to the opening pages of this Jesus Storybook Bible and look at some of the first clues when God created the world. And basically, God created everything. He created the trees, the hills, the little flowers they have there, the bicycles, they came later. But this is, He created the kids, He created the people, everything. He created the world, and it was perfect. And he put humanity in the world to manage his creation, to kind of be the middle managers, the supervisors. And basically, God was incredibly creative, and he made his people creative. And he said, I want you to go into this garden, and I want you to create. I want you to take this perfect world, and I want you to make it even better than it was in the original creation. And that was their responsibility. And that went well for maybe a few days. And then an enemy snuck into the garden. That enemy, his name was Satan, and he snuck in the form of a snake. And he came into the garden, and he began to whisper in Eve's ear and ask the question, is God really good? Can you really trust him? Does he really want what's best for you, or does he want what's best for him? Is God holding out on you? Can you trust him? Can you believe him? Do you really want to follow him? And pretty soon, God's people, God's family, God's kids, they began to seriously question and ask, can I trust him? Is he good? Do I want to follow him? Pretty soon they decided, these people who God loves so much, they decided they were going to rebel against him. They were going to join with the serpents. In their hearts they said, we don't want to follow you anymore. We want to go our own way. We're leaving the garden. Actually, because of their rebellion, God kicked them out of the garden. Said, if you don't want to be a part of my kingdom, if you don't want to live under my rule, then you cannot be a part of this. So they followed the snake, and soon they found themselves enslaved to the snake, to Satan, to God's enemy. But this is where we get our first clue. This is where God stepped in and gave his first clue about a rescue plan. Right before he kicked them out of the garden, God basically, he ran into the garden and he promised the snake, I'm going to fight you to get my kids back. I'm going to war with you. He promised that he would fight to get us back. He promised a rescue plan. Here's what he said in Genesis 3. It says, so the Lord spoke to the serpent. He said, because you have done this, I am putting a curse on you. I will put hatred between you and the woman. Your children and her children will be enemies. Her son will crush your head, and you will crush his heel. He said that God is going to fight to get us back, and that someday a descendant of this woman was going to go to war with the snake. And the snake's head was going to get crushed, and the son's heel was going to be wounded. So God had a rescue plan, and nobody really knew how this plan was going to work, how this plan was going to fit together. They didn't understand what the first Christmas present was going to be. But over time, we got more clues on how all of this fit together. The next clue was that there was going to need to be a substitute. Because when humanity rebelled, there was a debt to be paid. God is the righteous judge of the universe. God is the one who punishes wrong, who punishes sin. He's righteous, and all sin will be dealt with, and his kids had sinned. So if he was going to welcome his kids back, he had to deal with the sin. There had to be a substitute. And we get the first hints at what this substitute might be in the Old Testament with goats and sheep. And basically what happened there, God promised a substitute to pay for sins. And they take one of these goats and sheep when they realize that they've sinned. They take the goat or the sheep, and they would here, Nathan, can you be a sheep for me? Come on, stand up. Okay? Here's the deal. Why don't you bend down just a little bit like a sheep? There you go. So here's what they do when they sin. They would take a goat or a sheep, and they would lay their hand on the head of that goat or sheep. You're doing really good. I hope your neck isn't getting tired. They'd lay their hand on the head of the goat or the sheep as if to say, my sin is on your head. My guilt is on your head. My punishment is on your head. And then they'd kill the goat or they'd kill the sheep. And that would be a temporary covering for their sin. You did very well. Can I get one more box? Good. So there's this promise that there's going to be a substitute, but what form is that substitute going to take? They don't know. Another promise. God promised that there would be a prophet who would speak for God, somebody who would tell God's people exactly what God was like, a prophet like Moses. God says, I will raise up for them a prophet like Moses from among their brothers. I will put my words in his mouth, and he will tell them everything I commanded him. The next promise is the promise of a priest. In the book of Job, we meet this rich man who had absolutely everything. He had a huge house, he had a big family, he had all sorts of wealth. And then as the story goes on, he lost all of those things. He lost his wealth, he lost his children. His house collapsed in the middle of a great celebration. His house collapsed and his children died. And then he lost his health. And he had painful sores over his body, and everything went bad for him. And in this moment, he began to question, is God really good? Can I really trust him? How do I go to God? Because I feel like I was walking with God and I was doing what he wanted and that everything was going well for me, and now it's not. And I just want to go to God and I want to talk to him. I want to ask him, what is the problem? What did I do wrong? How can we fix this? I don't feel like you're being fair to me. But how do you go to God? How does a mere man go to God? He says, I wish that there was somebody who could go between us. I wish I had a mediator. I wish I had somebody who could speak to God on my behalf. But I have no one. Here's what Job says. He says, God isn't a man like me. I can't answer him. We can't take each other to court as if like a judge would settle the dispute. I wish someone would settle the matters between us. I wish someone would force us to work things out. I wish someone would keep God from punishing me. Then his terror wouldn't frighten me anymore. I would speak up without being afraid of him. But as things stand now, I can't do that. Job was longing for a middleman, a referee, someone to step between him and God and work it out. In biblical language, he was longing for a priest, someone who would represent him before God. And through this and so many other symbols and promises that God made, he let his people know that there was going to come a great high priest who would mediate between God and man, who would bridge the gap between God and his people. Finally, God promised a king from the line of King David. A king who would come and make things right. A king who would take everything that was broken in the world and he'd put Humpty Dumpty back together again. And 2,000 years ago, as the very first Christmas approached, God's people knew that the world was broken. They saw all sorts of corruption. They saw all sorts of violence. They saw people lying and cheating and stealing every day. They saw how the Romans had moved into their country and had conquered them and had oppressed them and had taken their homes and taken their wealth and taken away their freedom. And they said in their hearts, we long for a king who can conquer the Romans. We long for a king who can take everything that's broken in our world and has the power to make it right again. And we would follow that king who would deliver us from the oppressor. God promised in his rescue plan that someday a king would come. And more than any other part of the rescue plan, this is what they were looking forward to. But when they read the prophecies about this king, there were a lot of things that were still confusing. This king in the Hebrew Bible was called the Messiah. In the Greek New Testament, he was called the Christ. Both of them mean the anointed one, the one who's set apart to be king. They found out that this king would be born in Bethlehem. They found out that he would be born from a really young girl who wasn't even married yet. He would be born of a virgin, according to Isaiah chapter 7. They read about all the names that people would give him, and they analyzed all the amazing things that he would do. And they didn't really understand all the clues that God had given them, but they wanted a king. All they really wanted for Christmas was a king. You think about all the things on your Christmas list, You want this and you want that and whatnot, but the one thing you really want, right, it's the video game. Or it's the bike. Or it's the whatever. There's, out of all the things on your list, because you need to give a list to lots of people, there's one thing that you really want, and the one thing they really wanted was a king, someone to take care of the Romans. But that wasn't exactly what God had in mind. So with that said, I think your attention span's about shot. So we're going to get back into these clues and this Christmas story in a minute, but I'm going to invite the band back up, and we're going to take a few more minutes to sing. Here we go. Quick recap. What we got in the story so far. So God's people knew about the rescue plan. They knew about born in Bethlehem, born of a virgin, a girl not married yet, a king like David, a prophet like Moses, a priest to bridge the gap between me and God. But some of the clues just didn't really make sense. It was kind of like imagine you finally get the Millennium Falcon, that Lego that you wanted, and you start putting it together, and you're trying to get your mom or your dad to help, and they're not really as good at this sort of thing as you would hope that they would be. And you get to the end of it, and it kind of looks like what it's supposed to look like, but there's all of these pieces left over. And what do you do with the pieces? Did they give me extra pieces? Was this piece supposed to be here? Is my spaceship going to fall apart when it hits second gear? I mean, what's going on? And that was how it was for these guys. They had some of the clues that they understood where they went, and then they had lots of other pieces in the puzzle that they didn't really know where they fit. Like we talked about one of the clues last week where God said he gave different names. You're going to name him Jesus, which means God save, and he's also going to be called Emmanuel, which means God has come to live with us. Well, what does that mean? What we understand in hindsight, but they didn't understand what that meant. Or when this prophet named Micah, he wrote about a king whose origins are from days of eternity. What does that mean? Can just imagine the guys, they're reading that. We're looking forward to a king whose origins are from days of eternity. And one guy asks the other, like, what does this mean? Another guy says, I don't. Who knows what it means, but we're getting a king. And this king's going to kick the Roman tail. And that's going to be great. That's the kind of king that they were looking for. But that isn't the kind of king that God was offering them. So when the actual king came, many people did not recognize him as the king. The people who did recognize him, they were really, really excited that the king had come until they opened up the present and they actually got to look at it. Okay, have you ever been there? Have you ever been really excited about the present until you actually open it up and saw what was inside? And then you open it up and your thought is, why did you give me this? You know, you been there? So when I was a kid, when I was, I don't know, like 12-ish, the one thing that I most wanted for Christmas every year was Transformers. If you're around that age, you remember Transformers? You don't remember your little... Yeah, Transformers, they were amazing. It was the one thing I wanted. It was the one thing I asked for. Like Grandpa, get me Transformers. And occasionally, he would get me Transformers. And I'm like, you're going to spend money. If you're going to spend $40 on me, get multiple Transformers, okay? Some years I get one Transformer. I'm like, I love this. This is great. It was $15. But what are you spending the other money on? Okay? I told you that if Grandpa got me a sweater, I was going to say thank you, right? But I didn't always feel it in my heart. It was the original ugly Christmas sweater, which actually, back in the day, if you can imagine, this was in style. So if I'm tracking with what's going on with Old Navy right now, about 2 Christmases from now, this is going to be in style again. So be waiting, be looking, be longing. I'll see if I still have it, and maybe you can borrow it because it'll be cool again. But imagine you're looking for a Transformer. You're looking for a toy. It's going to be great. I'm going to love it. It's going to go with all my others. It's going to be a part of the epic battle this afternoon. And instead of getting Starscream or Megatron, you got a Christmas sweater. It's rough. Believe it or not, that's how people felt when they got Jesus. They said, we know a king's coming. We know there's a rescue plan. We know it involves a king. We want a king who can beat the Romans. The Romans are our biggest problem. Their oppression is our biggest need. Give us a king that can beat the Romans. But they understood there was a rescue plan. They forgot what God was looking to rescue them from. They understood that they needed a rescuer. They needed a deliverer. They forgot that their greatest enemy was not the Romans. Their greatest enemy was their sin. Their greatest enemy was themselves. The fact that they were enslaved to their sin. The fact that no matter how hard they tried, they couldn't stop sinning. Some of you are like, well, I'm pretty good at stopping sinning. Sure, you're good at not sinning in ways that you're not inclined to sin. Like most of you, you haven't killed anybody all day, and congratulations. It's amazing. Great. Merry Christmas. But there's other ways that are tug a little bit closer to our hearts in which we're just radically selfish. We're like the 1 or 2 year old. We've got some small kids in here that, it's breakfast time and you've given them Cheerios and they want Fruit Loops, okay? And what do? They cry, they pound the table, they grab that bowl, they throw it up in the air, they pout, they scream. I don't want these bland things. I want the Fruit Loops, okay? And they can't help themselves. You tell them to stop, and the tantrum just gets worse. And we're like that, right? Maybe it's not Fruit Loops and Cheerios. Maybe it is Fruit Loops and Cheerios, and you just haven't gotten over that one yet. But in 1,000 different ways, we can't help ourselves from being selfish. We can't help ourselves from getting angry at times. We cannot save ourselves from ourselves, and we certainly cannot save ourselves from the penalty for our sins. We need a priest. We need a substitute. We need a prophet. We need a mediator. We need a king who will rescue us from ourselves. As much as they felt like they needed a human king, what they really needed was God to come and to intervene in their lives. And that's what we see throughout the entire Old Testament, is that God telling his people, you need me to come and rescue you. There's a prophet named Isaiah, and this was essentially his message. The name Isaiah, it means God to the rescue. And that was the message that he shared with God's people over and over in this long letter that he wrote. He wrote it about 800 years before Christmas. And I want to share with you what he said to God's people. And it'll be slightly paraphrased. It'll be this version. But I am just going to read you the Jesus Storybook Bible version of the prophet Isaiah. It says, "Dear little flock, you're all wandering away from me, like sheep in an open field. You've always been running away from me. And now you're lost. You can't find your way back. But I can't stop loving you. I will come for you. So I am sending you a shepherd to look after you and love you, to carry you home to me. You've been stumbling around like people in a dark room. But into the darkness a bright light will shine. I will chase away all the shadows like sunshine. A little baby will be born, a royal son. His mommy will be a young girl who doesn't even have a husband. His name will be Emmanuel, which means God has come to live with us. He is the one King David's children's children, one of King David's children's 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 children. The Prince of Peace. Yes, someone is going to come and rescue you. But he won't be who anyone expects. He will be a king. But he won't live in a palace. He won't have lots of money. He will be poor. He will be a servant. But this king will heal the whole world. He will be a hero. He will fight for his people and rescue them from their enemies. But he won't have big armies, and he won't fight with swords. He will make the blind see. He will make the lame leap like deer. He will make everything the way it was always meant to be. But people will hate him. They won't listen to him. He will be like a lamb. You guys remember what happens to the lamb? Good. He will be like a lamb. He will suffer and die. It's the rescue plan we made from before the beginning of the world. It's the only way to get you back. But he won't stay dead. I will make him alive again. And one day, when he comes back to rule forever, the mountains and the trees will dance and sing for joy. The earth will shout out loud. His fame will fill the whole earth as waters cover the sea. Everything sad will come untrue. Even death is going to die. And he will wipe away every tear from every eye. Yes, the rescuer will come. Look for him. Watch for him. Wait for him. He will come. I promise. Love God. They knew they couldn't beat the Romans. They knew that they needed God's help to overthrow Rome. What they didn't understand is that they could not beat themselves. They couldn't defeat their own sinful, rebellious nature. They couldn't help themselves from rebelling against God. They couldn't help themselves from being proud. They couldn't help themselves from being selfish. They couldn't help themselves from wandering and going off their own way instead of following God. They needed God to intervene. They needed God to pay the penalty for them. They needed God to come and live inside of them and transform them from the inside out. That is the sort of rescuer that they needed. They needed a king who would defeat death, not just a king who would defeat Rome. They needed a king who would destroy their greatest enemy and defeat sin and destroy death, the one enemy they could never beat on earth. That's why Jesus died on a cross in our place as our substitute. He came and died so that we could have life to the full. That's the gift that God offers for Christmas. Whether it looks better than a Millennium Falcon Lego to you, or whether it looks worse than an ugly Christmas sweater, that is the gift that God has wrapped up and put under the tree. Someone to rescue you from yourself. Romans 3:23 says this. It says, the wages of sin is death. What we earn through our rebellion against God is death. But the gift of God is eternal life in Jesus Christ our Lord. God himself is the gift. And he's a gift that he offers by grace. This isn't something that we earn. This isn't something that we achieve. This isn't something that we merit. Ephesians 2:8-9 says, for it is by grace, that's undeserved favor. For it is by grace that you've been saved. By grace you've been rescued through faith. And this is not from yourselves. It is the gift of God, not by works, so that no one can boast. That's what we celebrate this Christmas season. That's what we celebrate every single Sunday. We celebrate that God became a man, that God lived the life we were supposed to live. He died the death we deserve to die. He went to the cross and his body was broken and his blood was shed in order that our sin might be atoned for, in order that we might be reconciled to God. That's what we celebrate at Christmas. That's what we celebrate at Easter. That's what we celebrate every day of our lives as Christians. Here's how we close out the service every week at Mosaic. We take some time to pray. We take some time to reflect. I know this sermon was a little bit more of a story than what we usually do. But we take a few minutes to look at what God has called us to. In this case, that he has called us to trust in him and hope in him and submit to him and follow him and celebrate his goodness to us and our desperate need for redemption. We look at what he has called us to. We look at how we tend to live apart from him, and we repent. We see the disparity between the two. We say, God, change my attitude, change my heart. Help me to see you as you are and follow you. And then for those of us who have placed our faith in Jesus, whether that's a long time ago and again today, or whether that's for the first time today, we publicly celebrate the faith that we have in the death and resurrection of Jesus. At the sides of the room, we have something we call communion, or the Lord's table, or the Lord's Supper, the Eucharist, whatever. Crackers and juice. It's physical symbols, outward symbols of an inward reality. That we have placed our faith in the death and resurrection of Jesus. That his body was broken for us, that's the crackers. That his blood was shed for us, that's the juice. And that our hope is not in doing better and trying harder, but that our hope is in the finished work of Jesus Christ. So, who's this table open to? It's open to anybody who wants to take it, but here's what it is. It's a public declaration of faith. If your hope is not in the finished work of Jesus Christ, if your hope and belief and conviction is not that God became a man and he died for you that you might be reconciled to him, then we don't want you to go through the motions. We don't want you to pretend. That'd be like walking down the aisle to marry somebody who you're not going to marry. Okay? This is an outward symbol of an inward reality, of a commitment of faith to God. But if that's your commitment, whether in the past or for the first time today, we welcome you to that table. And so what we're going to do is take a few minutes to pray. When you're ready, the communion elements are there, and then the band will come and close us in song. Thank you so much for joining us this morning.